Hey everyone, this is a continuation of our Bandits webinar. We had a number of really excellent questions which we didn't get to answer. And so we have here with us Luke Sonnet, our data scientist that will help to alleviate all the questions that people have. With us is also Ryan. He'll be joining me in answering the questions. So with that, Ryan, would you like to start?
Sure. Thanks very much for the intro, Kathy. Our first question, and this is an important one, is just really when should multi-armed bandits be used and when shouldn't they? We had a couple of kind of questions that went to different directions about this, but I don't know if you have a kind of quick overview of when they shouldn't be used.
Yeah, I think some of the questions we're asking about, the number of variations they could test or how many users they should be expecting in each variation. And in general, it depends a little bit on the metric that you're using and how much it responds to your bandits of interest, your bandit variations. So I think bandits are really most powerful when you have at least 4 or so versions of something that you don't have a strong belief will be better than the other up front. If you get into, say, dozens or even more than that, there's no reason you can't do that so long as you believe you have sufficient traffic. At a very minimum, we expect each variation to get a few hundred users to begin to update the bandit. But if you have a lot of variations, then you're going to want something on the order of many thousands of users, really, to begin to parse between those, because it gets a lot harder to get enough traffic in each variation when you get that many users. That's kind of the main takeaway. I would say that your interest in a bandit should be more driven by whether there's a clear business goal that you really want to optimize, that you're worried about damaging in the process of experimentation. For example, if you have a short running promotional period and you want to make sure that the bandit that runs during that period is showing people the correct, say, promotional codes or whatnot, so that by the end of the promotional period, when you finally learned what the winner is with the traditional A/B test, you haven't spent all this time driving traffic to variations that were performing poorly.
Great. What's the typical time savings that multi-armed bandits have over traditional A/B testing? Are we talking? Does it depend? Is it always a few X?
Yeah, so a traditional A/B test will always perform better in terms of getting you the right answer sooner if you have only 2 variations. Because in that situation, a traditional A/B test will do the best to drive traffic to those 2 variations and get you an answer. We'll split traffic between those 2 variations equally, and therefore we'll get you an answer of which is better sooner rather than later. As you increase the number of variations you want to test, the time savings with the bandit increases as well. Of course, if you have a ton of variations, like I said earlier, it can be hard to really parse out what's winning or what's losing in general. But if you're, say, comparing an A/B test with 5 arms to a bandit with 5 arms, in that situation, you could see something as much as a week off of a 3-week experiment. It's very hard to say. It depends a lot on your metrics, but that's the setting in which the bandit thrives. Because what it does is it begins to drive more traffic to the better, say, 2 or 3 arms of the 5 that you're testing. And in that situation, you'll get to compare those better arms against each other with more and more certainty sooner than you would if all 5 were getting, say, 20% of your overall traffic.
All right, so this next question is one that was really interesting when it came up in the webinar, and I wasn't exactly sure how to answer it. So I'm curious about your response here. So the question is, wouldn't seasonality or a significant event like a Black Friday sale skew results in favor of whichever variation is getting the most traffic at that time?
Right.
That is a great question. The short answer is that our Bandit implementation handles this case very well. The longer answer is that this is a problem in general for any kind of experiment where you might change the variation weights over time. Say you're running an experiment during an important promotional week, and there's a certain day on that week, like a Black Friday event, when you're expecting a lot more traffic, and the users that come to your page maybe spend more or less than usual. So they're a different type of user. And if on that day, you have a lot of traffic going to one arm instead of another due to the bandit deciding that's the right allocation, then if we didn't handle this problem in the statistical engine that we use, indeed, we would have issues with bias creeping into our experiment. What our Bandit does is it weights the traffic by period to ensure that for each variation, we get an unbiased estimate as if they had received the same amount of traffic over the lifespan of the Bandit. So for this, what this means is that for that Black Friday sale event, we'll make sure to properly handle those variations that get very little traffic and make sure that if there is something happening in those variations on that unique day, that we're weighting that appropriately and handling that in the overall variation estimates. It's a great question.
Cool. This was also a question I had asked as well that was important. How would you recommend B2B startups with like low traffic approach multi-arm bandit tests? Because given that B2B generally don't have as large a volume as B2C, and trying like multiple variations might not be feasible. Like are there any strategies they can use to still get meaningful results?
Bandits can definitely still be useful in the B2B context. We've run a couple ourselves as a B2B company. I would say the challenges with Bandits are the challenges for experimenting in a B2B setup are not kind of unique to Bandits. They're kind of the same across all types of experimentation. And in these settings, when you have a lower number of observations, the key is trying to use metrics that are the most likely to be movable in your experiment so that the plausible effect sizes are the largest and therefore the easiest to detect. This can often mean using a goal metric for your Bandit or your A/B experiment that is closer to the exact action that you're using in the Bandit and maybe further away from the eventual business goal that you might like to be influencing. Because it might be hard to get enough traffic to say, look at large contracts signed in 3 months, but you can at least get signal on some earlier interests that might correlate with that longer term outcome. And that's often the best you can do in that setting with lower data. But this isn't unique to Bandits or experimentation, and there's definitely settings when you can kind of move that upstream behavior in a B2B context where experimentation and Bandits in particular can still be valuable.
All right. I think this is our last question. What do you need to think about when you're picking a metric for Bandits? And in particular, does Bandits work well with monetary metrics?
Yeah, so similar to my answer for the B2B question, you want something that is going to respond to your Bandit, and you want something that doesn't have very kind of extreme behavior. So you don't want to have, say, a conversion rate that is incredibly low because it's going to be really hard to find out whether that 0.5% moved to 0.6%. And so you might need to pick something that is a little bit further upstream or a little bit more high traffic to make sure that the Bandit can appropriately learn more quickly. In the context of, say, an e-commerce site, a revenue or sales metric is honestly going to be pretty good at working for a Bandit because it will tend to have reasonable properties where you're going to get some measurement of the actual goal metric, and it's something that will often happen soon after the Bandit experiment you're running is shown to the customer, right? In, say, a checkout flow or a promotional campaign. And if you're concerned about outliers where you have a few users that are spending a little bit of money and some that are spending a ton, we do provide capping to help you kind of reduce that uncertainty. And in the context of Bandits, capping and reducing variance might be even more important to help you mitigate the impact of those outlier kind of users on your experiment results.
All right, Luke, another question for you. So you want sticky bucketing enabled for multi-arm Bandits? It seems counterintuitive. Why do you want to do that?
Sure. Yeah. So for context, sticky bucketing is the ability in GrowthBook to record what a user was exposed to and make sure that in the future, even if the experiment changes, say the Bandit changed the variation weights, they continue to see that same variation that they got the first time around. There's definitely an argument for a Bandit where users continue to get different experiences when they return later, but this has two problems. One, it can be hard to know what to do with their conversion data or what to do with their metric data, which bin do they belong to. If you put them in multiple variations, then you're going to have some issues with the reliability of your experiment results. But there is a use case. There is a case to be made for, say, only looking at a user's first exposure event, the first time they see the Bandit. At GrowthBook, we decided with our Bandit implementation to focus on ensuring that users get a consistent experience over the life of the Bandit, to make sure that when you roll out your Bandit to customers, they're not going to start to see 5 different versions of your page, and you can make sure that the long stream effects of experimentation are negative and showing users tons of different versions of your page. So that's kind of the use case we've optimized for. But I understand the interest of, say, making sure that return users don't get that variation that seems to be performing worse over time. But there's a trade-off there, and we chose to optimize for a consistent user experience.
Great. Well, thank you, Luke, for sharing your insights. And to our audience, stay tuned for more live Q&A sessions. We'll have like regular office hours starting in the new year. So you can register at the link here. And thanks, everyone.